All right, good afternoon. This is Trey Hargett. Today is Monday, August 27, 2018. Today we'll be discussing the second quarter of 2018 outlined in the Tennessee Quarterly Business Economic Indicators Report. The report is published through a partnership between my office and the University of Tennessee Knoxville's Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research. Joining me today is Dr. William F. Fox, who serves as the Center's director. The report offers a snapshot of a state's economy based on business data from the Division of Business Services. Let me begin the call by saying the data this quarter indicates initial business filings in Tennessee continue to grow now year over year for 27 consecutive quarters. Also, business services processed 10,888 new entity filings in the second quarter of 2018. That's up 14.3% from the same time period in 2017. And the last point I'll make is domestic firms account for 84% of all new entity filings, with new filings of domestic LLCs making up roughly 2/3 of all new filings. We will take questions shortly, and for now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Fox. Dr. Fox?
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. Let me note that the data reported in the current quarter's release indicates that we should continue to see economic growth through the next 6 to 12 months. Indeed, we now believe that this will be the longest recovery in the post-World War II time period by the end of the current state fiscal year. And so really good news. I think it's important to note that the growth in number of new entity filings in the second quarter was at the fastest rate of any quarter since the Great Recession. And so not only are we seeing continued growth, we're seeing somewhat faster growth taking place right now. Indeed, that was also supported by the strong GDP growth that was released for the U.S. in the second quarter at 4.1%. As the Secretary said, we're seeing excellent growth in domestic firms, particularly domestic LLCs, which grew very, very fast at 20%. And then a final comment I think worth noting is that while the growth in the big cities in Tennessee was very strong, and I'm thinking particularly about Davidson County and Hamilton County, which have been leading the state in terms of employment growth, but also Knox and Shelby County showing good growth. But in fact, we saw better growth in the counties other than those four, with over 15% growth. So good news in that the economic expansion continues to benefit many places across Tennessee and not just the big four counties. Mr. Secretary, there's some comments. I'd be happy to respond to questions should there be some.
Thank you. Questions, Dr. Fox?
Hi, it's Chad Sisk here with Nashville Public Radio. Could you talk a little bit about Shelby County? It says that it led the state's four largest counties with 18.8% growth. Do you have any sense of what might have been driving that?
Chad, as you know, what we're reporting here on is the number of firms that are being created in Shelby County, as well as the other counties. And so it's not a single thing. In fact, as you can see in the data, over 2,100 new businesses going on in Shelby County in that quarter. I mean, that's really impressive growth. Overall, we don't see as strong of employment growth in Shelby County as in some of the others, but we do obviously from this see some entrepreneurial activity taking place.
Yes, Dr. Fox, Richard Levitt at WJCW up in the Tri-Cities. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm good, Richard. How are you?
Doing well, sir, doing well. Do you see any headwinds on the horizon, though? You mentioned 6 to 12 months, or are you sort of hesitant to look much beyond that in terms of any slowdowns?
I'm always hesitant to look very far into the future, but again, I think given the fiscal stimulus that's taken place in the U.S. over the last 6 to 12 months, both on the tax side and on the spending side, we think that the probability of continued growth, at least for the next year, is very good. We'll likely see a little bit slower growth in 2019 than we do in 18, but there's no reason to think of any significant headwinds. Now, we can sit here and imagine possibilities, I mean, a really escalating trade war, some kind of a war because of the international conflicts are examples. Fed moves too fast in terms of pushing up interest rates are headwinds we could imagine, but none of those seem probable at this point, and certainly over the next 6 to 12 months, it would be very unlikely, both because of this leading indicator, but the other kind of stimulus in the economy, to imagine anything other than continued growth.
Okay, thank you.
Brandon Hollingsworth here in Knoxville. Wanted to ask a little bit of a more specific follow-up to the question you just had there, which is specifically about unemployment rates. At least when I took macroeconomics a million years ago, there was such a thing as an ideal unemployment rate, and if you sunk much below that, about a 4 or 5% unemployment rate, you opened up the possibility, at least over the long term, of potential labor shortages. Is there anything in the data that indicate, I mean, we've had 3.5% or sub 4 now for more than a year, that could be a possibility, or at least one
Brandon, I do. Yeah, Brandon, I do think we're certainly in the range of where finding labor force gets difficult. We have seen in Tennessee, though not in the U.S., increases in the labor force participation rate over the last year or so. What this is saying is a bunch of people who weren't working or had given up on finding a job have come back into the labor force and are looking again. That's helping. Still, with the unemployment rate down in Tennessee at 3.5% and been below 4 for more than a year now, we have to feel we're pretty close to fully employed. And so again, what economists continue to expect is the wage rate growth to accelerate. It hasn't happened in any significant extent yet, but that still would seem probable with wages beginning to gain. And, somewhere over the course of the next year or so, it's going to get really difficult to maintain the kinds of employment growth that we've experienced really throughout the recovery.
I wanted to ask a follow-up, if I could, about the sales tax revenue figures, because that is Tennessee's primary source of income. Just for my edification, is that a reflection of greater consumer spending? So why the uptick there? And then also, I think that's, as far as this relates to like state budgeting, that's not necessarily a guarantee of greater flexibility in 19. We're talking about just keeping pace with the budget that was approved earlier this spring, right?
Yeah, the state just announced, I think, its total growth for fiscal year 2018. Sales tax grew 4.6% for the year, which is outstanding growth. It's very solid, very strong on the standards of what other states are experiencing, and it's very good given the kind of underlying economic growth taking place. So I think, it's really encouraging. Some of that is certainly consumer spending and a little better ability to collect the sales tax on remote sales. So those are factors in it. But remember that we sales tax a lot of the purchases by businesses in Tennessee, as do other states, what economists call intermediate transactions. And so it's also a signal of just a solid, fast-growing economy that we're seeing a lot of sales tax imposed on those kind of transactions as well.
And finally, from me, the personal revenue growth is an interesting figure, but of course you mentioned that for a lot of people who have been seeking employment or are working sort of the lower tier jobs, minimum wage type jobs, we haven't seen a commensurate wage growth as we had perhaps in previous decades. Are the data granular enough for us to understand where that revenue growth, personal income growth, let me clarify, is taking place? Is that happening in the upper tiers of the economic ladder, more evenly distributed, or do we know?
So we don't have great data on that, particularly at the state level. One point that's been made to me by business leaders is that while we're not seeing great wage growth, and perhaps as fast as we would have anticipated, that employers are beginning to offer more fringe benefits. And so even the startup of more pension plans or better matching within existing 401k plans and so forth is taking place, better health care fringes and so forth. And so there may be some hidden growth in wages, because when you see the numbers, it's just on the dollar wages themselves. It's not the full compensation of the worker. But I do think that the data are consistent with the fact that the better earnings growth has been for better skilled jobs. And it continues to be true that people with low education, low technical skills are finding it more difficult to get a job and certainly to find rising and sustainable wages.
All right, that was it for me. Thank you.
Further questions?
This is David Riley, Marion County News. In the new LLC filings, is there a number available on how many single manager LLCs are being created of the overall numbers?
We might be able to get that for you. I don't think, obviously it's not in the report, but we might be able to pull that for you.
It's not life or death. It's just interesting as I'm kind of crunching the numbers here. If that was relatively easy to get to, I'd be interested to look at that in the context of this report.
You're at the Marion County News, is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay, let's see. Keith, let's see if we can pull that number and email it to him.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for participation. Dr. Fox, as always, thank you for the report.